wherever you are located. I'm Nika Saidi, Team Leader for Prevention of Violent Extremism. I have the pleasure of welcoming you on behalf of UNDP, the Permanent Mission of Norway, and the Permanent Mission of Ashmed Kingdom of Jordan to the United Nations, to this UNDP Development Dialogues event, Preventing Violent Extremism, Pioneering the Use of Behavioral Science. UNDP notes that whether based on religious, ethnic, or political grounds, extremist ideologies glorify the supremacy of a particular group and oppose a more tolerant and inclusive society. Since the tactics, methods, and nature of violent extremism have been evolving, our understanding of the mechanism which lead into and out of the violent extremism needs to evolve. Through having a humble posture of learning, we are trying to understand how to deal with factors that challenge our peace and security. UNDP has developed a step-by-step guidance to support practitioners to apply behavioral science in the formulation and implementation of PVE programs. Today's event consists of 4 segments. We will hear from our co-hosts on their commitments to evidence-based PVE programming. Then we will listen to Jennifer and Fadi, who led the development of this guidance, of which we are here to celebrate the launch of. After this, we will hear from 3 UNDP country officers who have pioneered this work. Then we will go to Josh to hear his reflection and feedback. At the end, we will have 15 minutes for question and answer. Please do submit your question and we will collect and respond at the end. I apologize in advance, but to save time for question and answer, I won't introduce the speakers one by one. However, speakers' bio will be shared as they begin speaking. Without further ado, I pass the floor to George. George, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and tremendous thanks, Nika, for the introduction, and good day to all colleagues. I'd like to offer, on behalf of UNDP, our sincere thanks for everybody's participation in what I hope to be a very insightful and good discussion, and with special thanks to the participants and the panelists that are presenting today and putting such interesting substance on the table. In particular, I'm very pleased to welcome His Excellency Mr. Odd Inge Kvalheim, the Deputy Permanent Representative of Norway, and His Excellency and Minister Mr. Suki Omush, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, who both together serve as the co-chairs to the group of friends on preventing violent extremism and have kindly agreed to participate as co-hosts of today's event. So I would like to express my gratitude both for your participation today and for your broader leadership on this really important topic. Our discussion today is focusing on how insights from the behavioral sciences are aiding in our collective efforts to build and sustain peaceful development pathways, and specifically through the prevention of violent extremism. Behavioral science, which includes a range of disciplines such as psychology, economics, sociology, cognitive science, and neuroscience, offers important insights into how human beings make decisions and take actions. And this enables more people-centered approaches to designing and delivering our peace-building and development engagements. And we're increasingly seeing behavioral insights being used to enhance policies, programs, and projects across a broad range of sectors, including education, employment, criminal justice, and others. These valuable insights help us to better analyze and understand underlying challenges and barriers to peace and development, and to develop tools that can be used by policymakers and development practitioners to improve both the impact and effectiveness of our collective efforts. Specifically in the field of preventing violent extremism, we found that behavioral insights provide a new frontier of innovation in our policy and programming efforts. Behaviorally informed interventions by design are deeply rooted in local contexts and in understanding the ways in which individuals interact with those contexts. And so a stronger integration of behavioral insights in programming, particularly in the design phase, but also throughout the program cycle as a whole, really can impact the impact and effectiveness of our programming. And importantly, it can also provide us with an enhanced evidence base on which we can monitor and evaluate the results of our engagements by demonstrating measurable change in behavior at the individual and institutional levels. This ability to design based on an understanding of people's behavior and to measure change brought about by our engagements is essential not only for improving our specific and individual programming, but really through its potential to influence the strategic direction of UN policy and our multilateral partnerships on preventing violent extremism. And I'm really pleased in this respect to see with us today such a broad representation of experts, member states, and UN entities championing this work, and really do believe that a more systematic integration of behavioral insights will prove to be transformative for our work ahead. For our dialogue today, you will hear how select UNDP country offices have successfully applied behavioral interventions to PVE programming. We'll hear from our Sudan and Yemen offices, where UNDP has partnered with Nudge Lebanon and B4 Development to test behaviorally informed programming, which aims to disrupt the process of radicalization to violent extremism. This work has been expanded to Tajikistan, Pakistan, and Uzbekistan under the EU-funded Strive Asia project, which has been implemented jointly by UNOCT, UNODC, and UNDP. And we're quite pleased with the status of our interagency collaborations on this issue, which we feel has led to an increased coherence among UN country teams on the ground. These experiences and experiments have sought to address issues that we know have been holding back positive outcomes of our engagements. And these include things like low participation in youth training programs or lack of continuous engagement in community-based psychosocial support. And we've used behavioral insights to test a range of practical, behaviorally informed solutions, which we'll hear about today, in order to improve the impact and results of our program. And these experiments have proven that leveraging a more nuanced understanding of what motivates people's behavior can strengthen our programmatic efforts to reduce both engagement and re-engagement with violent extremism. And the results, as you will hear from our speakers, demonstrate that even small adjustments to the way that we deliver projects can increase the impact of the initiatives in ways that we hadn't fully reflected on the realities and evidence of human behavior. And these solutions are often very straightforward and don't necessarily require significant resources, but can nonetheless vastly improve development programming for the people we serve. Our experiments on the ground and the experiences that we've had have formed the basis of the publication that we're speaking to today. And you can find a link to the document from our event page at developmentdialogues.org. And building on this learning, UNDP is very committed to further integrating behavioral science into not just our PVE programming, but our broader development engagements. You'll hear about this guidance specifically from my colleague, Jennifer Colville, and from our partner, Dr. Fadi Maki, representing Nudge Lebanon. So colleagues, really happy to have you all here with us today, and I'm looking forward to a very insightful and active discussion. Nika, thanks, and back over to you.
So without ado, Mr. Roding, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nika, and many thanks to George as well. It's a great pleasure to be here. Good morning to everyone. Dear friends, dear colleagues, on behalf of the Permanent Mission of Norway, let me just thank UNDP for initiating this very timely meeting. And thank you, Jordan, for co-hosting with us. Norway attaches great importance to preventing violent extremism in all its forms. And together with Jordan, we share the group of friends of preventing violent extremism. In my brief introduction, I will share some of Norway's experiences working preventively. But first, since member states are in the middle of negotiating a global counterterrorism strategy, I wish to also underline the importance of maintaining a strong focus on preventive measures in this regard. I wish to thank UNDP also for their important contributions, where today's presentation is a good example of this important work. In Norway, we see behavioral insights and evidence as key elements to include when working preventively. As this is still a relatively new area of work, the sharing of best practice and lessons learned is essential to ensure the most effective implementation. Reports like presented today is also a good way to help bridge the gap between academia and practitioners, which we see as very important. Now, please allow me to highlight some Norwegian experiences in working preventively and that are related to what we are discussing here today. In Norway's National Action Plan against violent extremism, the preventive work is directed at all forms of extremism, including extreme Islamism and right-wing extremism. Our experience is that basic preventive efforts can have important effects against radicalization in general, regardless of ideology. Norway has put a lot of effort in educating relevant professionals so that they are better able to observe early warning signs of radicalization. We see that knowledge and awareness about radicalization and violent extremism is crucial in order to identify vulnerable individuals before they reach too far in the radicalization process. Findings from the Police Security Service in Norway, examining the background of extremist individuals before they became radicalized, show that there are several similarities between the members of the extreme right-wing and extreme Islamist circles in Norway. These similarities include weak labor market attachment, low educational level, drug abuse, and crime. However, there are also differences. For example, individuals who are radicalized to right-wing extremism are in general of a higher age than individuals who are radicalized to extreme Islamism. This applies especially to anti-immigration and anti-Islam right-wing extremism. Such findings have been useful in our work to further develop the preventive work, and we will continue to do research, learn from others, and share experiences on these issues in order to further improve outcomes. Before I conclude, I wish to also touch upon all the evidence on the pandemics after terrorist activities. Although limitations on travel, etc., has affected their ability to be operational, at least outside of conflict zones, we also know they have not been laying still in their beds, waiting for better times. According to trend analysis from the UN Counterterrorism Executive Directorate, both far right and Islamic terror groups have actively engaged in online recruitment, promoting their terrorist narratives during the pandemic, with the internet now serving as their new home base, which makes today's presentation even more relevant. We still do not know how the pandemic will manifest with regards to terrorism and violent extremism, but there should be no doubt that we need to effectively step up our efforts in addressing this issue. Thank you very much, and back to you.
Thank you so much. His Excellency, Mr. Sotkayamush, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nika. And good morning, everyone, dear colleagues. I want to thank UNDP, George Conway, Nika Saidi, and all our colleagues who are present, especially my dear colleague, Odeng. It's always a pleasure, sir, to work with you. Jordan and Norway, as co-chairs, are proud of this timely meeting that we are having, and we hope that we will keep working in that direction to provide a better understanding of how to face violent extremism and understand the trends and potential threats that they impose on humanity. It's a great opportunity again to have the opportunity to address all of you, especially with the theme of very important element of understanding the phenomena of extremism, which is the psychological point of view. It's of course the best starting base from which we can really understand the best methodology to face this global challenge and mitigate its impact on our lives and on humanity in general. Understanding the complex nature of violent extremism should start from the root causes of the phenomena of extremism. How to all the elements that can shape the psychology of a society, and of course affecting vulnerable people, especially youth, who are socially and economically excluded and marginalized. Outdated education system is another potential weakness of in facing this problem. We should not underestimate the feeling of history that it injects itself in the psychological fabric of a person. Political injustice, unsolved conflicts, and as you rightly mentioned on social rejection, lack of this feeling of safe inclusion in a society is also another element. Justice in general, I mean, let that be legal or political, freedom, sort of rights and human rights is also another element that can trigger this kind of environment that that is an incubator, if I may say so, for recruits in radical and extreme violent thinking. Allow me here to leave a space for experts and scientists to deal with this element and hopefully reflect and shed some light on the way forward together, a collective effort to face this challenge. Allow me to speak a little bit about Jordan's efforts in this domain. Jordan promotes peaceful coexistence and harmony, believes in dialogue and coexistence between and among religions, and is working diligently to create intellectual responses to the narratives and extreme ideologies of Daesh and Al-Qaeda. They are the main and the strongest extreme movements in our region. Considering the complexity and urgency of these challenges, His Majesty King Abdullah II invited the Aqaba process in 2015 as a platform to address short and mid-term military security and intelligence needs to counter terrorism and to prevent violent extremism online and offline, with an aim to achieve a long-term ideological and de-radicalization strategy, one of the preventive approaches to limit the recruitment of youth. The Aqaba process platform has also focused on cross-fertilization of ideas, good practices in PVE and countering terrorism, and facilitating information exchange and sharing from hotspots across the globe. In addition, the Aqaba process brought partner governments, along with international organizations and tech leadership, to address the risks of extreme content on the internet. Jordan also fights terrorism by leading on an intelligent battle. On the national level, Jordan established in 2015 the Community Peace Center as a major pillar of the Jordanian strategy to prevent violent extremism, which engages the community in countering extreme narratives and promoting modernity, coexistence, and peace. PVE challenges has escalated during this COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic created and strengthened economic hardships, poverty, increased employment, and left us with a feeling of so much uncertainty. It also provided fertile grounds for well-funded terrorist groups to use these unfortunate circumstances and lure and recruit this enfranchised and marginalized groups and especially youth. We should look at sustainable development as an ally in the war against terrorism. Unsecured cyberspace is another challenge. Many social media applications and gaming platforms are exploited by terrorists and violent extremists to spread the culture of hate, terror, and xenophobia in a way that facilitates the targeting of young as potential recruits. Another challenge that fuels violent extremism is hate speech, racism, and intolerance. It speeds the spread of terrorism and violent extremism. Misinformation and misguided narratives are also means to recruit more followers. The narratives are made up and built based on false and distorted scientific facts or religious beliefs in a way that serves the extreme ideologies, and they thrive in misinterpreting religious texts and historical events. I'm looking forward to hearing our speakers and learning about the examples and lessons learned in the usage of behavioral science to address violent extremism through preventive measures, and to looking at the guide that was developed by UNDP and partners, and allowed me to conclude that despair is the breaking points where societies can easily be driven into violent extremism. So we need to do our best to make sure that all root causes of this phenomenon are addressed, and development, as you rightfully said, is basically one of the most important elements that can prevent societies from falling in that deep and dark valley. I thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Your Excellencies, George, Nika, colleagues and partners. Great to be here today. Thank you for sharing the screen. If we can go in, great. All right, so it's great to be here today to present UNDP's new guidance for applying behavioral science to support the prevention of violent extremism. This has been a long time in the making, with a lot of folks dedicated to making this final product what it is, and we're delighted to collectively share it today. In the field of development, we tend to think that we know, based on our expertise and experience, what will work and what will generate impact. Behavioral science helps us test the assumptions that underpin what we think we know. Behavioral science has been part of UNDP's innovation toolkit for some time and has been applied in various contexts. In partnership with Nudge Lebanon and B for Development, we began testing the application of behavioral science in the context of preventing violent extremism in Sudan and Yemen. Based on this work, we have developed this guidance that has then further been applied in Central and South Asia. We'll hear from a number of country offices today, as George mentioned. Let me get into the guidance itself. It's mainly intended as a toolkit for development practitioners looking to apply behavioral science in the context of PVE. Roxani, if we could go to the next slide, please. Here we lay out the structure of the document. As one works through this 6-step process, the value of the product can be found in the step-by-step guidance, with questions to ask yourself, exercises to complete, tips to consider, all illustrated by examples from the projects in Sudan and Yemen. So some real world applications that have informed this guidance. I think one of the most valuable sections is the lessons learned for each of the steps, as these give insight into the hurdles in undertaking this kind of work and can be helpful when designing a project in this new space. I want to highlight a couple of steps of the 6, steps 3 and 4. So identifying the best moment to intervene and identifying behavioral barriers. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I want to highlight step 3, which is identifying the best moment to intervene, because this structure kind of underpins the entire guidance, set of guidance. And it's based on the experiences we've had. We've identified 3 optimal moments to intervene in improving the effectiveness of our programming and developing an evidence base as to what works and what doesn't. The first is around mobilizing participants for project activities. You may have the best project in the world, but if it's too difficult for the intended audience to sign up or to register or otherwise get there, then that's a problem. The second is around their engagement, kind of having them meaningfully engaged throughout the project. If there are barriers, behavioral barriers for them being able to participate, they can't get to the location, they can't access the materials, again, that's a problem. And then the third kind of moment or point of intervention or entry point is the follow through. So following through on their engagement in certain behaviors after a project or initiative activity has concluded. So if they're not interested, they're not vested, they're not committed, or the way the follow-up actions are designed too difficult, then that's a problem. So collectively, we have these problems, which we see as perfect opportunities for behaviorally informed interventions across each step or each part of this process. Once an entry point has been identified, we go to the identification of behavioral barriers. Next slide, Roxani. So we, as humans, often rely on mental shortcuts to make important decisions. We have trouble translating intention into action, and we have conflicting short and long-term preferences. In short, we're all human. In short, we're all susceptible to cognitive and behavioral biases that result in systematic errors in judgment and inconsistencies between our preferences and our actions. We have 3 categories of biases. Roxani, yeah, great, thank you. We have 3 categories of biases that we've codified in the document, in the knowledge part of the guidance. One is around how we process information. The second is about how we make sense of the world around us. And the third is how we make decisions. Let me give an example here, which is on the next slide. Thank you. All right, it's around loss aversion. So many of you can, this is coming from the category on the right, how we make decisions. Many of you may recognize yourself in this scenario, but we value loss more than we value gain, even if it's the same absolute value. The implication here could be that we offer incentives to participate at the outset of an initiative that could be lost, rather than holding the incentive for completion that you would get at the end. So somebody becomes invested if they have an incentive that they've been given and they really don't want to lose it, which is more powerful than an incentive that they're striving for and would be rewarded with at the conclusion. This sounds basic, but our behavior, we demonstrate time and time again that we go against this kind of rational thinking, and if we can design our programs that take into account these kinds of biases, we believe that our programming can be much more effective, and we're able to understand, we can take into account the complexities of human behavior. We can make our programming more human-centered, and we can measure and learn what works and what doesn't. We see this very much, these behaviorally informed interventions and behaviorally informed programming very much as a complement to the structural work that we typically do. And we find that both, the combination of both, is what makes our programming the most effective that it can be. We're extremely excited to roll out the guidance across our country offices with our colleagues and national partners to take on behavioral science and understand the rationale and irrationality of our mind and the way we behave. We're very excited about this. We thank our partners Nudge Lebanon and B for Development. And with that, I will hand it over to Fadi Maki. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's a great pleasure to be with you today, all. It is indeed, as you mentioned, a proud moment to have come so far and developed this guidance note on how to apply behavioral insights to what I would say one of the most complex policy challenges of our time, violent extremism. And I mean, the way it started from simple discussions of whether it can apply to actually seeing it being applied is true a kind of pride for all of us. The first thing I want to mention here is that it is, as you mentioned, a useful tool for practitioners, of course, but UN organization, implementation agencies, security apparatus in governments, actually everyone who is involved in the value chain of the behavioral interventions. And essentially, as you mentioned, we list 6 steps, and that's the simplicity of how we present this guidance note. And to start with, we talk about the overall parameters of the challenge, which we should always try to make sure they're rooted in the local context. So we talk about what data is available. We speak to stakeholders, as well as benchmark always relevant situations, not to copy and paste, but to start from somewhere, because context matter, and what works in one place does not always work in another, and hence the reason to experiment. And when we look at target population, number 2, we recommend using the persona to help in this regard. And that's been very useful in most of the design interventions we used. And the entry point is probably one of the most fascinating parts. When we look at the journey of the challenge, at what stage do we go into behavioral insight, what we end up having is so many places, a long list of potential entry points. And then we use what you mentioned, the mobilize, engage, follow through, which is a great kind of framework for this. And then under step 4 is what are the biases, what are the relevant psychological phenomena that stand in the way of achieving that target behavior. Then look at the behavioral tools that could push or nudge people in the right direction in the desired behavior. And we use kind of our shape difference framework. And finally, no kind of intervention is kind of well done unless it's put to test. So we say, how do we kind of potentially measure the impact? And RCTs is only one of the tool set, of course. The second thing I want to mention is that this, of course, has been the backbone of the first wave of behavioral intervention, and actually ever to use systematically behavioral insight to fight violent extremism. And I meant the work in Yemen and Sudan, and later on with UNDP Central Asia, Tajikistan, Pakistan, and Uzbekistan. So one lesson learned is that we saw that there are 2 levels of applying behavioral insights in PVE settings. Either what we call direct applicability, meaning tackling the challenge head on, applying behavioral tools against it, such as values affirmation, such as inoculation theory and psychological vaccine. The second level is what we did in many of the experiments in the region, namely through what we call layering behavioral insights on top of the challenge or the existing program to enhance its impact, the process, the output indicators, such as we mentioned, getting people to be registered, to attend when they register, to actually stay engaged when they attend, and so on. The other lesson learned, and that's where I'm concluding, is that kind of we learned so much from that first wave. And we learned in particular the importance of capacity building for BI, for all the stakeholders. This is why we took note of this. And when we worked with UNDP Central Asia, we designed the mentorship program with that in mind before starting implementation. And this is going to be a key feature in PVE programs going forward. At the end of the day, the only way to scale up BI and streamline its use is through capacity building of all the stakeholders in the value chain. Looking forward to continuous exchange on this very important topic. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Claudia and Jennifer. So we wouldn't be here if our country offices would not take this approach and the challenges. To be honest, it has been a very long way. We have to go through ups and downs. So 6 country offices joined this experiment. And now we have 3 of them here presenting their work: UNDP Pakistan, Sudan, and Uzbekistan. Symbol, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anika. Thank you. Yes. Roxane, if we can have the first slide. Thank you all. Good morning to everyone from Islamabad. Thank you all UNDP colleagues, Crisis Bureau, and Nudge Lebanon for this opportunity to present our BI and PV related work and share our experience on integrating BI experimentation in our PV work. Very quickly, I would briefly like to talk about our local level disengagement and rehabilitation LLDR project, and then go on to explaining and talking a little bit about the BI experiment. Roshani, if I could have the first slide, please. Thank you. As you can see from the first slide and the project timeline at the top of the slide, the project was launched by the Decentralization, Human Rights and Local Governance, which is DHL program, UNDP Pakistan, as a pilot in Swat district, KP province in 2017. Since last 4 years, the project has been successfully implemented across Pakistan's different conflict and regional contexts. Evidence from the project phases has allowed the development of a full rights-based community stabilization model, which we are in the process of now handing over to the government of Pakistan for scale up. The model includes both individual and community level disengagement and rehabilitation activities for ex-offenders and at-risk individuals, 50% men and 50% women, and includes various mental health and psychosocial support interventions. A key notable aspect of the model is that gender and role of women are integrated within the theory of change, which means we go beyond just including women beneficiaries and women-focused interventions. The empirical evidence gathered from the program's implementation highlighted the importance of social factors as key drivers of radicalization in Pakistan. Our theory of change rests on the premise that role of women contributes to the social ecosystem, which not only amplifies extremist trends in communities, but can also work as protective factors to support de-radicalization and peace building. Based on this, UNDP Pakistan designed several women-related interventions, including introducing the gender desks. Please, the next slide. The gender desks, what is the gender desk? The desk acts as a mechanism for addressing gender-related issues. They are placed within the local government institutions, which is the social welfare department or local government offices, or even the women development department. It functions as a referral mechanism for grievances, resolving them by referring them to local specialized organizations, government organizations and institutions, and providing another layer of protections and support to at-risk women that are the beneficiaries of the project. Services offered through the gender desk include civil registrations, health and mental health, education, legal services, domestic and gender-based violence, disabilities. The GD or the gender desk services are also available not only just to the project beneficiaries, but to the rest of the women in the target communities. The problems that the project team faced during the third phase of the project, which was being implemented in Karachi, when the first time that we had inducted the gender desk intervention in our program, was lack of awareness of beneficiaries, lack of access, knowledge of how to use the gender desk, lack of trust within the community, social stigma, and do no harm, because we were worried about the security and safety of at-risk women and some of the ex-offenders also. So confidentiality was an important consideration. For this, the problem we decided to focus on, given the whole spectrum of problems and issues that we were facing for the BI experiment, was how to get more women to report grievances to the gender desk, because we felt in Karachi they were unable to report, and it wasn't, we could have had a wider number of grievances reported than what we got in the end. So we decided, next slide please. So the behavior insight interventions that we created to deal with this particular issue, with the support from Nudge Lebanon team, 2 specific tools which are comms related were developed. These tools were adapted to local languages, context, and design. This is the 3rd slide. Are we on the 3rd slide, hopefully? Yeah, designs. This included a commitment card, which listed the services that a gender desk was offering, a calendar on which participants could select or tick mark the date and time of their preferred visit, a checklist of the steps required to report a grievance, and address and contact details of the gender desk. So we worked with the whole team to kind of, we had an English version which was given up and then given to us, and we adapted to the local conditions and the local context with languages. It takes a lot of amount of work to actually do that. And the second was a reminder. There was another card that reinforced the most important information provided earlier, which the participants could tick the services that were of interest to them. And the objective of both these was to reduce the mental and cognitive load in the participants so that, which prevented them from reaching out to the desk for the grievance redressal. So briefly, the results were very, very good of the experiment. It was very successful. Of the treatment group, 90% submitted at least 1 grievance during the data collection period, in comparison to only 44% of the control group. All these tools now are being replicated in our follow-up local level disengagement projects in our subsequent phases. One that we have a standalone project in Sawat right now, which is ongoing with the Australian High Commission. We have replicated all these interventions there, and we just visited that, and it was very successful. And the other one now, we are starting a large project in Balochistan at the moment, and it is also going to be replicated there. So I think it was an extremely useful experience. We wanted to adapt and develop those interventions, which the teams and the local capacity within the local capacities of the local resources that we got in each and every phase and regional context in Pakistan. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ali Muntasir, and we are representing UNDP Sudan. So we're looking from our experience when we wanted to look at behavioral insights and prevention of violent extremism case study. We first started to understand the complexity and the issue of PV itself. So we had a research done before we looked at the behavioral insights component. So to understand how violent extremism in Sudan is and the major drivers, push and pull factors that affect people to join violent extremism. So once we kind of have identified that, we kind of linked with Nudge Lebanon to understand more or less about what we can do to reduce the amount of people joining violent extremism, especially vulnerable groups. So we had 4 various segmentations, which were mostly youth, vulnerable youth in, for instance, in prisons, and another one in university students that are diaspora, that have not really integrated into society and so forth. So once we've kind of defined these various segmentations, we had to choose one as an experiment to see how behavioral science can influence prevention of violent extremism. So we chose the one to include the people, the vulnerable groups in prisons. We had a prison that had over 8,000, and previously this prison had individuals joining violent extremism groups and actually committing violent extremist acts in Sudan. So what did we had a lot of discussions about what to do with Nudge Lebanon, and they guided us to choose something called value affirmation exercise. And it's looking at values affirmation for people who are in, it's more or less to do with minority groups, people who are disadvantaged. And this affirmation exercise helped to decrease some of the stress and some of the issues that face people that are, for instance, going into educational systems that that work in that kind of level. And this helped us bridge the gap that is a lot of people that drop out or do not continue their examinations. This experiment helped a lot in that aspect. So behavioral insights kind of, for us, this was a kind of a teaching moment for us to understand that there is multiple elements that you can look at, creating portfolios to understand what the issue is and trying to pinpoint what they are. And behavioral science had helped a lot to bridge that gap as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ali. Nadira from UNDP Uzbekistan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, thank you. So let me start from this share screen. I'm sharing my screen, colleagues. So I'm managing a UN joint program used for social harmony in the Fergana Valley. Fergana Valley is an area in Uzbekistan. So let me just try to explain what were the main challenges. So this is a youth-oriented project, and Fergana Valley is the specific area. As you can see, those challenges listed in my presentations, that youth employment and also gender inequalities, and also the highest number of labor migrants leaving the country as a low quality human resources. And so several issues that actually we are focused on and dealing with. And the challenges is very pronounced in Fergana Valley, is the highest population density. And as a result, the highest crime rate also. And we have a lot of labor migrants living to Russia, to Kazakhstan, and also to then some research says that they were radicalized during the labor migration. When they are abroad, they are vulnerable and they can be easily used by some specific groups and radicalists to be engaged in some illegal actions also. So what we also have in this area, women's labor force participation is 25%. And also this area is, let's say, more traditional or conservative. And women's participation in decision-making process is not as high as we wish. And also highest number of criminal, as I said, registered in Fergana Valley. When we started our BI experiment, Behavioral Insights, we decided that we will divide our target groups into two. So first of all, they should be in the age between 16 and 30, because of our project focus group is youth. So 16-30 is our target group. The first group was identified as a youth repatriated from the zones of armed conflicts like Syria, Iraq, Turkey, and etc. So, and the second group is youth living educational correctional institutions, special closed institutions for troubled children. So also what we try to do or to overcome what kind of challenges and to provide opportunities to overcome stigma. As you know, once they arrive or return from some conflict zones, people and communities, they have a specific attitude towards them. So to overcome stigma and bringing motivation to those families, to those youth who actually, some of them already lost any interest and they see only one scenario. But we try to engage them in a very active startup acceleration program. Let me show you the a little bit later infographics after I complete this. So what is also important for us to develop jobs. So those from target groups could easily find job or become a self-employed by using their own creativity, by giving them a chance to enhance their leadership skills, or by enhance their some let's say creativity and etc. So building resilience among the youth by putting emphasis on positive aspects of their lives. That was also mentioned in our BI design when we designed this project. So of course, enrolled youth from different backgrounds to interact, to socialize, and with each other. What we were thinking about when we started BI experiment, that some active youth can positively impact to those from our target groups. We decided to mix up them. We divided into the groups different types of youth, active youth, leaders, already with some achievements, with some medals, with some experience in life, and those from our target groups. Then this is a, can you see it? Let me just a little bit zoom it. Yeah, here, our startup accelerator. We decided to implement behavioral insights experiment within this startup acceleration program. Actually, we are very grateful to UNICEF, because in our country, only UNICEF has how to say this information on repatriated. This is a closed information, and only some force or internal ministries, internal affairs, internal defense ministries, they have information. And UNICEF, within their mandate, also helped us to find those and to deliver information about our acceleration program. Total number of informed participants were 76 out of 236 enrolled youth. And only 70 of them registered finally by help of actually UNICEF social workers assisted them. And here you see gender disaggregated data. What kind of interventions we used? Short inspirational video by a youth role model and youth ambassadors. Youth ambassadors were accompanying those from target groups and all others by sending them just reminders, brief information on upcoming events, and etc., to ensure that they are engaged, that they are still active in our accelerator program. Short inspirational video was not successful, unfortunately. Why? Because we could not reach all those from target areas, from target groups remotely. As you know, pandemic caused a lot of problems for different kind of offline events. So we had to transfer most of our events to remote mode, to online mode. And startup acceleration training program was also online program. Unfortunately, we could not ensure live communication, live interaction of both, I mean, target groups and ordinary youth within this experiment. But on the other hand, that was a very positive sign, because they didn't have to share their stories from their past. They could directly participate in different interactions without giving any information about themselves. So here you can see several figures, how many. This 4 months training program actually was very useful for them. Most of the post-training tests and assessments show that they were interested, but we had several problems. If we consider the numbers, when we had 263 young people enrolled in the beginning, and at the end we had only 83 and 86 youth who successfully completed the program. Why? We had several problems, like even poverty or lack of economic funds, lack of funds to buy gadgets, to connect to the better internet. The local internet connection was poor, or sometimes some electricity issues also occurred in rural areas. And due to this kind of infrastructural issues, we also, as UNDP, as a project, provided with internet packages. We tried to engage our national partner to make available computers, gadgets for them, but not all of them had this chance to visit youth centers on a daily basis to use computers and gadgets. At the end, we had 83 young people. You can see divided by regions. So Andijan, Namangan, Fergana, these are 3 regions in Fergana Valley. And what is, I think, positive result, that one of the our target group representatives, a young lady, she had won the biggest prize, so up to $5,000 small grants to fulfill her startup project, to realize, to implement it. And other two, they also were nominated to the different grant programs by our national partner. So unfortunately, due to pandemic and due to some other issues, we could not achieve those initial results that we expected we would have. But anyway, this is a good sign, I think, that we started this kind of experiments within UNDP projects, because this is the second nudging experiment that I actually took part. And this one was interesting because young people from different groups who already, some of them already lost any motivation or interest in further development, but by engaging them in this kind of programs, we can ensure that some of them, at least let it be 20% of them, will have some severe changes, positive changes in their life scenario. So I think that we shall keep on using this kind of experiments. And it would be great if we could initiate another experiment within UNDP Uzbekistan's project and within our young people oriented projects. For example, next stage, we will have a summer camp, I hope, if epidemiological situation will not get worsened. So we will, I think, have some experiments again. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks a lot. So we listened to colleagues from UNDP Pakistan, Uzbekistan, and Sudan of how did the experiments evolve and carried out. And now we hear from Josh, who is going to share his reflection. He's very knowledgeable in BI and also mental health and psychosocial support, and he is going to give us some feedback. We try to, as mentioned, have a posture of learning. And in this learning, we are here to have more insights from Josh. Josh, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nika, and thank you to all of the panelists and for sharing their really excellent and fascinating work. I'm sure you'll agree. And thank you to Fadi and Jennifer and the rest of the team at UNDP and Nudge Lebanon who have conceived of, I think, this really helpful guidance document. I'm just going to offer a few initial thoughts and reflections, and I'm sure there's much more to say on all these points, but I wanted to take a bit of a zoom out lens on behavioral science, and particularly as applied to this very complex set of policy challenges that we call preventing violent extremism. So I mentioned, I think this is a fantastic contribution to the field, speaking of the guidance that's been produced and the experiments and the trials that have been described. And I think one of the things that makes it so useful and helpful is that it provides a lot of fuel, if you will, for those of us who work in this field who find themselves often addressing frequent misconceptions that people have. The field of behavioral science is still very new. It's particularly new when applied to something like preventing violent extremism. So I think, it's always going to be important to carry these, to carry in your mind the critiques that others are going to have, or perhaps some of us on this call, in fact, even will have when reading of these projects that have been done. And so I just want to highlight some of the ways in which this new guidance note really addresses quite head on some of these issues. So one of them, for instance, is often when we think about behavioral science, when you see a behavioral publication, there's lots of icons of gears inside people's brains and a lot of talk about applied psychology, and all of that, of course, is well placed. But it's easy, I think, to take away the perception that this is somehow about changing people's minds, or about changing the way that people think, or perhaps even about adjusting some of the underlying mechanisms that people are using in their cognition. And of course, that's not the case. And what we're ultimately doing here is simply trying to make it just a little bit harder for people who are at risk of, say, joining an extremist group to do so, or perhaps make it easier for them to stay on what we might consider to be an ideal pathway. So in other words, we can change people's behavior without directly changing their mind, without going through an ideological path, without trying to convince them of something that they're not already convinced of, or without trying to deeply change the way that their brains work. Now, that's not to say that there's not a role for doing that, of course, and there is obviously a literature, an important literature that seeks to do precisely that. And we've talked here about psychosocial support and the importance of dealing, for instance, with underlying trauma, the importance of education and the importance even of ideology, certainly of identity. So there are many cognitive mechanisms at many different levels of depth that require treatment when we think about preventing violent extremism. The projects that have been presented here make use of those pathways, but are going in a different pathway, right? I mean, are ultimately about changing action, almost in a way which is ambivalent to the underlying mechanism. And that's really important to recognize. But what that also can give rise to is the second misconception, which is that somehow behavioral methods are somehow small potatoes or some sort of sideshow to the main event, which is, again, the sort of deeper cognitive shifts that we would like potential extremists to make. You know, often you'll hear behavioral science criticized as trying to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic, or somehow making tweaks around the edges to other programs which are more important, such as some of the psychosocial support work that's been cited. So I would counter that, and I think the report makes this explicit, is that really stems from a false dichotomy of having, on the one hand, a behavioral mechanism, and on the other, these more deeply psychological and neuroscientific methods. You know, Beyond Conflict, the organization that I work at, we use all of these methods together in complementarity. And I think what is made clear in the report are all the ways in which that can be done to great effect. Both of these approaches are important, and in fact, they're not supplementary. In fact, neither can be really used to its fullest effect without the other. So when we learn, for instance, about a psychosocial support program in prisons in Sudan, or youth engagement work in Central Asia, those programs can't exist without individuals who sign up for them, who persist in engaging with them, and who then take action after they've engaged with them. And so a lot of the work that's cited in the guidance note is very directly seeking to reinforce those types of behaviors. And on the other hand, we can't simply do a values affirmation exercise or send reminders to people without having an entry point, without having a program in place that to which people who are at risk are already allocating a significant amount of their cognitive bandwidth, their attention, and receiving treatment for the underlying mechanisms that put them at risk in the first place. And so I think there's this direct complementarity that we have to keep in mind. We can't have one without the other, and they both need to happen together in a very deeply integrated way. And so I love that the report deals with that question head on and shows examples of how these two different approaches, different though they may be in the sense of the mechanisms that they work through, can be used together in complementarity. The last thing I wanted to say on this point is that, when we think about the individuals here that are at the center of this work, regardless of the context in which this work is being done, one thing stands out at the level of a sort of overall meta behavioral insight, which is just that it's actually hard for people in a context of extreme scarcity, in a context of a conflict zone in which there's so much transitional change happening around you, in which so much seems uncertain. It's actually quite hard for these people in their environment to stay away from this path. And again, in the behavioral approach is trying to make it easier for people to stay on the right path. It is really hard to even come forward to sign up for an educational program if you're in prison, even if you have an inclination to do that. It's actually really hard once you've gone to that first session to fight off what you perceive to be the social norm of how others are behaving around you, or ignore the temptation, for instance, to allocate your time elsewhere or your attention elsewhere, and stay engaged through that program through to its completion. It's really hard to then take action on the basis of what you've learned once you, say, get out of prison or out of that type of environment and are back in your home community. And so we have some sense of responsibility to empathize with these individuals in this situation and make it easier for them. Now, that may be really hard. It may be really hard to think of this work as ultimately being about empathizing with people who are themselves extremists or have tendencies that we might find difficult to sympathize with. But that doesn't mean that we can't empathize with their situation as humans. And I would even go so far as to say that the guidance in the note that Nudge Lebanon and UNDP have put out is, in a way, a behavioral intervention itself to make it easier for all of us together as program designers to empathize with the communities we're trying to serve. You know, when you see all those icons, when you see all those visuals, all the frameworks and the charts and the arrows, what that's really doing is giving you a playbook, a guide, a manual for going through that process of applied empathy. That is what behavioral science and behavioral insights is really all about. It's about trying to understand what it's like to be in the shoes of the people that we are designing for. And that's not an easy exercise for us to do as program designers. And so the guidance notes like this are going to be hugely important and I hope influential in making it easier for this field to conduct that empathetic exercise and bring our programs closer to the way in which the populations we're trying to serve need to receive them. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. And sorry, colleagues and dear participants, for rushing through all the presentation. We know there's a Zoom fatigue and we know there is a lot of work you have to do today and you are still joined us. I'm going to share the question and the panelists will answer. Jennifer, the first question is to you. Are you looking at process to PV programming or programmatic content?
Both. So yeah, I mean, you can tell from the interventions that we've had across the countries that we have a lot of variation in the programming, the programmatic response. So whether it's supporting entrepreneurs, whether it's working with the prison population, whether it's working with communities and providing health support. So what we're looking to do is take these programs and see how we might be able to increase the effectiveness of them by looking at the way at each step of intervention or interaction, how we might be able to increase the success of that interaction. So how we can reach more people through the programming, how we can engage them and have kind of a meaningful interaction for them or something that's relevant for them, and then how we can support them as they kind of move forward on from that intervention or that activity. So it kind of goes along this entire process, but it can be applied in a variety of programmatic contexts. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Jennifer. So the next question is to Fadi. I don't know, it's about the security forces. How could we use behavior science to encourage members of the security forces to refrain themselves from using the excessive force against civilians? Is there any good example from the other places?
I think it's a very tough one, Nika, and we don't want to venture into recommendation because that's a fairly sensitive issue. But we've seen a lot of experiments where painting kind of peaceful kind of pictures of school children on the street had an impact on reducing kind of mob sabotage and destruction. So that is one thing that, I mean, I know it was tested in England. We think there's a lot of training that needs to happen for the security forces, behaviorally informed training that kind of get them to visualize the impact of their intervention. There is also something we've seen kind of maybe in a different kind of setting where you remind even experts using a checklist of the do's and don'ts. And we've seen even in an operating room setting and that it could have an impact on experienced surgeons in not missing out on certain steps. So a lot of tools could be used, but context matters. And we'd like to kind of know more before you could venture into kind of recommendation of this kind. I hope that was useful.
Thank you. So the next question is about use. And Nadir, I think you're in the best place to answer that. So regarding the recruitment of vulnerable youth, is it possible to affirm that to overcome the present biases, it would be necessary to align behavioral intervention with consistent public policies as a form of trade-off?
Let me find that question. Cannot find. So am I right in my understanding? The question is whether we can use BI as a on the governmental level within the public administration principles, right? Used as an official approach in solving some issues, right? Am I correct in my understanding?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so actually, as I said, this is a very new approach. I mean, BI and nudging is a new topic for our government. And this is last year when waste management issue was raised and also nudging experiment was conducted in Uzbekistan. We tried to turn it into some official document, like we developed a policy advice. We already prepared and submitted report on the basis of a conducted experiment, but at the end, government didn't sign any regulation or any official document. And even that company, which is the monopolist on waste management issue, they decided to change a bit their approach, and they didn't want us to allow them to, because in our policy advice there were some points which were not benefiting that company. Maybe that's why they didn't promote, they didn't lobby on that document. But currently, government is not considering nudge as a official way to solve some issues in public administration. So we hope, but that one by one, showing the benefits of BI, we can somehow motivate them or empower them to use this BI as a good tool while making or while implementing some use policy or other kind of policies in public administration. I hope, but now currently we don't have any official document or regulations based on BI or nudging principles. We don't even have departments in governmental offices which could use BI as a good tool. And this is just on the very, very beginning stage.
Can I say something, Nika, just as a follow-up?
Please.
So I think it's very important to bring kind of buy-in from government and to share lessons learned from local context. Success stories is one, of course, but also do not shy away of sharing failed experiments, because there are learnings from failed experiments. And then just telling them that, I mean, at least we know that that project or program did not work. So that in itself is a true value of kind of failed experiments and learning from. So it's very important to bear that in mind. And we love to call it celebrating failures as much as celebrating success.
Nika, if I could add something here, sorry.
May I just add also, in our country, it's better to show economic profit from implementing any kind of nudge principles. Currently, it is based on mostly gains, not social gains, but mostly on economic benefits. That's why maybe they are considering whether they will win if they implement nudging principles BI experiments, or whether they will just have a positive image. So if we consider economic benefits, of course, this kind of BI experiments will not help them to have this in a short period of time. It takes time to show what kind of benefits government will have by implementing BI. And for example, you know that in UK, when by implementing BI in tax collection, of course, they could easily demonstrate economical benefits from that. But in our case, unfortunately, we cannot. And both experiments did not show any economic profit to government. So to motivate them, I mean, thank you.
Sure. So colleagues, we have reached the end of the program. There is another event is going on. So I would like to thank again the panelists. Thank you for your contribution, and our co-host, the Permanent Mission of Norway and the Permanent Mission of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Very grateful to have you all. Thank you all for joining. Have a good day or good evening, wherever you are.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Congratulations.
Very
Thank
useful.
you.
Thank you, Nika.
Really interesting discussion, colleagues. Thank you.